This is going to be purely educational. And you may have some questions, but for the sake of time, we would love everyone to jot down their questions in the Q&A. And following this meeting, we will put together a frequently asked questions along with the answers in a PDF and email it out to everyone. So at the end of the webinar, there will not be any time for questions, so please jot that down in the Q&A section. A replay of the webinar and slide deck are also available upon request. If you would like to receive that information, please jot down my email address, which can be found right there, rlinneman@walivebig.com, and I can forward that out to you after the webinar today. A plug for our April webinar, which is with regards to really cyber crime, stimulus theft, vaccine scams, extortion scams, all emerging risks for employers. So please jot down the date of April 28th at 10 a.m. and throw that in your calendar. An official invite will be sent out in the next week or two. Who's WA? We are a local 100% employee-owned risk management firm. So we work with employers to identify their business and people-related risks within their organization and create a strategy to help employers plan smart so they can live big. One of those risks that we're talking about today, a health risk, is with regards to mental health in the workplace. So I wanted to introduce Sue Abderholden, Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Thank you, Sue, for taking the time today to present to us. And with that, please take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Ron. Thanks for inviting me today. So, so what are we experiencing? Well, sorry, it does. There we go. So we're living with a lot of uncertainty during COVID, right? I mean, we don't really know when everyone can be back together. When this started a year ago, we thought it was going to be maybe a few weeks, maybe be back, right at the beginning of May, the most end of June. And of course, now it's turned into, over a year. And we're not really made to live with that kind of uncertainty. Clearly, we can't predict the future, but not knowing like when we can be back together, when we can go into offices, when we can be with our families, when we can travel, all of that has really heightened our anxiety. We also have people who are worried about catching COVID and maybe getting someone else sick. And when we have people who are essential workers who have had to leave their home every day, who can't work from home, this has actually heightened their anxiety as well. We have people who live alone and they have become much more isolated during this time. But honestly, none of us are used to being with our family 24/7. And that has also kind of created some problems within families because you don't have your own time together. You're just not used to being together all the time. We have people who've lost their jobs. And so they're worried about, kind of the eviction notices. Will they lose their home? When will the eviction, emergency go away? What about food? All of those kinds of things. And then we have what I would call ambiguous loss. So there are things that we have not been able to participate in. So we have kids in high school who didn't have the graduation parties, people who graduate from college whose families didn't see them walk across the stage, right? Maybe missing that first birthday party for, a new grandchild, weddings being canceled or really, kind of limited in terms of the number of people who could attend. But I would also add in funerals. So we have had more than 500,000 people die in our country because of COVID. And we have not been able to hold normal funerals. And funerals are a really important part of our grieving process because you have to come together, you're breaking bread together, you're telling stories, you're crying, you're laughing all at the same time. And that is really important to healing from grief. We also have families who are trying to teach their children from home, and distance learning has not been great for many families. If you're trying to balance working from home and teaching your children, depending on the space that you have in your house, you have several people crammed around a kitchen table, people fighting for good internet. If you had a child who was in special education and they had an individualized education program, you're now a special ed teacher and you don't know what you're doing. And so that's been really hard for families. And then we have folks who were trying to support perhaps an elderly person who was living in their own home or someone with a disability. A lot of personal care attendants and in-home services were not being provided during this time. They were doing it by phone or, or by video, not the same. I think we've all missed that physical touch, whether it's shaking hands or, hugging friends or family members. That's been really hard. And while some people have said it's been great to work from home, that hasn't been true for everyone, especially if you weren't set up to do that. So people don't have good ergonomical chairs, right? It's the desk isn't at the right height because they're sitting at a kitchen table or trying to have the laptop on their lap. I mean, it's just not a great setup for a lot of people. And then for folks who have experienced trauma, having some kind of control has been really important. And during this time, we've lost all control. Sorry, this thing is really touchy. The other thing I want to mention is that while we're all in the same ocean, we are not in the same boat. And so the pandemic has not hit us all equally. So we know, particularly for the BIPOC community, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, it has hit them harder. And it's due to a number of different things. One is just, honestly, just our structural racism. So we have people who are living in food deserts, right? Or who've been denied opportunities for different jobs that offer sick leave and things like that. And BIPOC communities are also more likely to live in a multi-generational household, which means you have people going out in different ways and then bringing, frankly, the contagion back into your home. And so that has left them actually dying at a much higher rate than others. We also know the impact on the Asian Americans. Oh yeah, sorry. Let's do this poll. So have you been feeling any of the following during the pandemic? And it's, of course, secret, so no one knows how you're answering. Give you another, just a few seconds here to finish up. Okay, so let's see what the poll results are. So you have, over 30% of you feeling more stressed. Not a surprise, right? Next you've got, anxious about the future or feeling alone, definitely. Not so many people eating more junk food. That's good to see. And none of you answered that you were drinking more alcohol. Now, whether that was honest or not, we don't know, but we do know that actually people are drinking a whole lot more. So great, let's go ahead and move on then. So the other thing, and we just saw it happen yesterday, right, is that the impact on Asian Americans has actually been higher. And it's important for you as employers to know how the pandemic is hitting different people. And I don't know if we can stop sharing the poll or. There we go. What is happening here? Maybe Ron, you can help because for some reason my mouse is making this move very strangely. So let's go to the Asian impact.
Are we on the right slide there, Sue?
No, got to keep going back.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone. This happens every now and then through different Zoom channels. It just doesn't like your mouse. And so I do want to say that for Asian Americans, they have experienced, frankly, being beat up in parking lots, being attacked. We don't know if it's connected, but we saw all the Asian women who were killed yesterday in the southern states. And so they also are experiencing greater stress and anxiety during this time because they're afraid of what's going to go happen when they go out in public. Next slide. And then we just have to bring up, because we're from Minneapolis here, Mr. Floyd's murder. And so for the BIPOC community in particular, this has just added another level of trauma to people. So on top of what we're experiencing during COVID, they're also experiencing, frankly, the impact that this has had on their community. Next slide. So what this has all led to is frankly heightened anxiety and depression amongst most of us. I think if there's any silver lining, it's that most of us have experienced some type of anxiety or depression during this time. Greatly increased use of alcohol. The sales are way up. People are drinking a whole lot more. We're all getting COVID-19 fatigue. We are tired of this. We are tired of Zoom meetings, right? We're tired of not being going out into the community. And we're just all experiencing, as you all said, a whole, just really high stress levels. Next slide. So the impact of stress is not great on our body, both in terms of our mind and our physical self. So leading to more depression and anxiety, but also things like headaches and stomach aches. And when you have high stress, that can actually lead to diabetes, heart disease, and high blood pressure. So it's really important that we address our stress and also the stress of our employees. Next slide. And so one thing to just point out is just because someone may be exhibiting symptoms in the workplace doesn't mean that it'll lead to poor work. So some people with accommodations and support are actually able to do fine. For others, it can be more difficult. We especially are concerned if it's untreated or undertreated, because that's when it can interfere with performance. And we don't want you, we're not giving you a hammer so everything looks like a nail. We don't want you going out and diagnosing people, but you need to just be aware of some of the symptoms you might see in the workplace. Next slide. And so mental illness says really what it's about is disrupting a person's thinking, feelings, mood, ability to relate to others, and just their daily functioning. It's important to understand that it's actually treatable, very important. It is biological in nature. I mean, it can actually change your brain structure. And, we know genetics and environmental factors play a role, but we also know that this extreme stress from the pandemic is actually increasing the rates of depression and anxiety in particular. We also now know that people who caught COVID, somewhere between 30 to 60 days later are developing serious depression or anxiety. So you need to be aware that this is happening in the workplace. Next slide. It affects about 1 in 5 adults, 1 in 25 for more serious. The most common is actually anxiety disorder, which we know right now is going to be way up. Depression is next, followed by bipolar disorder, and then there's other more serious ones like schizophrenia, PTSD, eating disorders, borderline personality disorder. And it's just important to note that it is connected to other healthcare conditions like diabetes, heart conditions, MS, things like that. Next slide. So let's talk about what maybe you have seen in the workplace. So if you want to quick take this poll and we'll see what you see. Okay, so top is people being overly emotional, difficulty concentrating are huge ones. Next, decreased productivity, difficulty remembering things, tardiness, can't screen out stimuli. So those are all pretty common things that we actually see in the workplace. So we can stop sharing the poll. So overly emotional is a huge thing. And when you're experiencing depression or anxiety, you're going to see that a lot. We also see difficulty concentrating. So someone with ADHD, you can kind of understand that, or that they can't screen out the stimuli. They can hear that light, the old fashioned fluorescent lights. They can hear the elevator down the hall, very distracting. Depression makes it difficult to concentrate as well. And then we also see there might be changes in stamina, maybe how many hours people can work. It's not as long as perhaps they did before. They might have difficulty handling time pressures, just feeling like they can't take like 1 more ounce of stress, frankly, on their lives. And then again, we also see the physical problems coming through, things like back pain and things like that. Next slide. And is there a way to take the poll down?
Yeah, you should just be able to exit out.
It should be minimized.
Oh, there we go.
now.
Okay. So now we want to talk about steps to promote better health. So next slide. So we have to remember that mental health, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, and it's a continuum. So you have some people that have great mental health. They can, handle the everyday things of life, back up on the freeway, someone not moving fast enough through a green light, right? Somebody standing too close to you in the grocery store. We can handle all that. And then there are other people where they can't. And it's a continuum. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Next slide. So what you want is for people to talk about this, right? Because if people don't talk about it and don't share that they're struggling, they're going to just kind of keep not doing the best work that they can. And that's not what you want to have. You want to have people who are productive in the workplace. So it's important that you think about the attitudes, right? So you want to be promoting self-care. I know a lot of employers have done things during this time, like paying for a Calm app, or, kind of promoting, breathing and meditation, your employee assistance program activities, things like that. You have to remember, if people are afraid to talk about it, they're not going to come to you because they're afraid that they're frankly going to face discrimination. They might not get a raise or be promoted if someone knows that they live with serious depression or something like that. You definitely want to encourage access to treatment, because again, that helps people, and then it won't have as much of a negative impact on the quality of their work. The other thing to remember is they might have a family member, a child, a teenager, a spouse, a partner that they're also supporting. And that can actually also create a lot of additional stress, especially when it's your child. And just one word of advice is, think about mental illness as you would any other healthcare issue, and you would treat it the same. Next slide. So one thing I want to talk about is language, which we don't really think about very much. So if you just kind of wrote down all of the slang words that you know for mental illnesses, right? Psycho, nuts, there's a whole bunch of them. And maybe some of the words that we use to describe people with mental illness, just kind of, in your head, or just kind of put them down there. So if you can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the words, right? But what are the slang words for heart disease, diabetes, cancer? We don't have them. And I'm not trying to be politically correct or, the word police or anything like that. But when we use those kinds of words, it makes it harder for someone to come forward. If you have a young adult, who is, 21, they're starting to hear voices, they are very afraid to come forward to say that's what's happening to them, because someone's going to label them as crazy, or someone's going to label them as violent. When we talk about someone going through cancer treatment, chemo, right? We talk about how courageous they are. Have you ever used the word courageous with someone with schizophrenia? Who is battling negative voices in their head? How about determination for someone that perhaps, broke a leg or broke their back and is, doing physical therapy to come back to walk? We talk about determination. It takes a lot of determination for someone with serious depression to actually get out of bed in the morning. And then even things like, inspirational. So there's a woman out in California. She's actually a law professor, and she's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner, and she lives with schizophrenia. I would say her story is pretty inspirational. So, again, we need to start thinking about mental illness as any other healthcare issue, and we need to start using respectful words to make sure that people will come forward and get treatment, because that's when they're going to be your best employees. Next slide. I just wanted to show these two cartoons. So first you have someone says, I get that you have food poisoning and all, but you have to at least make an effort. Well, clearly we wouldn't say that to someone, but how many times do you think someone with depression has been told that? And the next one is, well, lying in bed obviously isn't helping you. You need to try something else. Again, we wouldn't say that to someone who is hooked up to an IV bag, right? But we say that to people with mental illnesses all the time. So we really have to think about how those symptoms prevent people, right, from getting out of bed, from taking that shower, from helping out with their kids, from getting to work and be productive, and not blame the person, right? Not say, well, come on, just get over it, right? But really understand and be more empathetic to the situation that they're in. Next slide. So Bezos isn't necessarily one of my favorite persons, but I do kind of like this quote. We've also always talked about work-life balance. And what he's saying is, it's not that strict trade-off. And I think especially during the pandemic, the lines are all blurred, right? And so we have to think about this in a different way. Next slide. So what we like to talk about is work-life harmony, right? And so really encouraging people, when you decide you're off, you're off. We all need that break from work. I work a ton of hours, but I try to at least have, some time, whether it's eating my dinner or watching one of my favorite, shows, or rewatching, which we're doing a lot these days, right? A show on Netflix. Then I'm off. Then I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not answering my emails during that time. I'm just focused on being off. The other thing, and I think especially during the pandemic, is we have to manage our expectations. If you're trying to teach your children, and trying to work at the same time, you're probably not going to get as much done. And that's just being realistic, no matter how hard you work, right? And if you're, teaching 5 hours a day and then adding another 10 hours, that's just not healthy. And really helping people think about when they work best in the morning. And so, some people are early birds, some people do better, late at night. During the pandemic, we've told staff who have children in particular, you just work when it's the best time. I'm not going to look whether you're on from 9 to 5. You work when it's the best time so that you can really focus and get your work done. And then focusing on what we do well. So, there's all, we all have things that we kind of push off to the side, but it's better to start your day on something that you're good at, right? Because it kind of frames your mind for the whole, your frame of mind for the rest of the day. Next slide. So we all need to address stress, and you need to be promoting stress relieving activities for your staff. So one thing is walking meetings, which even now we can kind of do if we're wearing masks, but when the pandemic is over, if someone's really struggling, having a walking meeting helps. One is when you move, the endorphins get released in your brain, and that actually helps in terms of coping with anxiety and dealing with depression. If any of you have had teenagers, when is the best time to talk to them? In the car, right? When you can't look at each other. So sometimes difficult conversations are best when you can't look at each other. And so, think about that way. 10-minute meditations, they really work. We actually bought the Calm app for all my staff. It's a great app. Most of the things on it are free, but there's some additional things you get when you pay for it. They have 1-minute meditations. I'm not a 10-minute person. I can do a 1 minute, and you can feel your blood pressure and your heart rate come down even in that 1 minute. Listening to music can certainly help, journaling. For folks that we have a lot of people with mental illness that work here at NAMI, we get noise canceling headphones so they aren't distracted by everything, and they work really well. And they work better than listening to music for some people because they have to turn the music up so loud they get a headache. Moving every day really helps. We've been kind of teasing people saying, at noon when your kids are home, during distance learning, so put on some music and dance in your kitchen. You might feel like an idiot doing it, but you're moving, your kids are laughing, right? It just helps your entire spirit. Really pushing people to have healthy snacks, drinking more water, certainly help. And we know now the importance of sleep to our brain. And a lot of people are struggling with their sleep right now. And one of the things I remind them of is, how did you put your little kids to sleep? You had a routine, right? We're going to take a warm bath. We're going to snuggle up. I'm going to read you a book. I'm going to turn the light off. I'm going to sing a song. I'm going to rock, whatever it is, right? We have a routine, and that little kid knows pretty soon I'm going to fall asleep. If you're having trouble sleeping, you want to do the same thing, right? Don't look at a screen at least a half hour or more before you go to bed if you're having trouble, right? And create a routine. I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to read a chapter of my book, and then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, right? And it lets your body know what to expect next, and that can really help. Another thing is to make sure that your room is cold, not hot. And some people just use an eye mask because they really need to block out all the light. Next slide. Another thing is again, power naps. Now you might think that that's kind of funny, but actually, having some caffeine and closing your eyes for 10 minutes can actually help rather than struggling through while you're trying to keep your eyelids up. One thing that you've seen a lot, I know, on social media is people doing puzzles in particular. And the reason is when you're looking at a puzzle, you are not thinking of anything else. You're looking at that little piece, trying to figure out where it fits in. You're not thinking about work. You're not thinking about the pandemic, right? You're thinking about that puzzle, and that gives your brain a rest. We also tell people, limit your exposure to the news. It's doom scrolling, frankly. You don't need to know that every single hour of the day. So limit your exposure to the news. And I've told that even to news outlets. And control what you can, right? So you can control how you spend your time. You can control a little bit by washing your hands and wearing a mask, right? Doing those kinds of things that will protect you and your family. Um, breathing exercises are actually really helpful when you kind of spend that time for yourself. So one of the things that we suggest, and, I've had situations where I had, a very ill family member, 2 little kids, it's just like you're so stressed out. And I would literally sit in the car for a minute or two, close my eyes, take some deep breaths. And when you're doing breathing exercises, you could just do one quick one with me here, is that you want to breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 6. So you breathe in through your nose and then a whoosh. Now put your hands on your stomach and do the same thing. Can you tell how it can kind of relax you? This isn't something that takes 20 minutes, right? It's a few minutes. And when you try to do that kind of slow, deep breathing, you calm yourself down internally, which is a really good thing. And lastly, technology boundaries. One of the other benefits, frankly, of the pandemic is that, especially if you have children at home, you're at home. You're not running them to practice or band or this house or that house, right? You're generally at home eating meals together. Eat your meals together. Put the phones away, have everyone, I don't know if any of you watched This Is Us last night, but you passed the bowl around. Everyone had to put their cell phones in there and you paid attention to each other, right? And that's really important, especially right now, because we're on technology, a lot of the hours of the day, and it's just not good for us. Next slide. So how many of you smiled when you saw this cat, this little kitten? I hope all of you did. So one of the things to do is, find pictures that you smile at. So smiling, actually, it seems kind of fake, right? But smiling, again, it changes something in your brain. So find some things that will make you smile when you're feeling really stressed out. Could be pictures of your kids or your dog or whatever it might be. Find something that makes you smile. Next slide, because positivity is an important piece of all of this. One of this great psychiatrist down in Rochester, he said, before you get out of bed in the morning, think of 3 things that you're thankful for. Just 3. Could be that you had a good night's sleep. Could be because, your kid is smiling today. Whatever it might be, 3 things. And what that does is it sets you out on a positive step as soon as you get out of bed, because you're thinking positive thoughts. And positive psychology is really a thing, and it really does work. So when you're feeling pretty stressed, do that. If you're starting to feel pretty stressed and that's not working, right? Watch a funny movie. Watch something that makes you smile or laugh, because again, it will do the same thing. Next slide. We also know that when we help others, we feel better. So I don't even know the family. They're a block down from me. And they've been putting out, whenever it's been nice, like these really wonderful sayings on there using sidewalk chalk art, right? And they're just lovely. And so I actually left them a note with a bunch of baked goods this weekend, because I was like, you know what? You brought joy to me on a walk. And I felt so good about just doing that small thing. And they actually reciprocated. I put my address on it because I didn't want them to think I was a creepy person or anything. And they left me another quote on my sidewalk. And, it brought a lot of joy to both of us. And so giving back and doing something like that can really help. Now, yes, it's hard right now to volunteer. But think of all the little kids during this time who have been drawing pictures and happy notes to seniors living in nursing homes. Right? You're at the grocery store, you add some more cans of soup or beans or rice into the food, receptacle for people who are, have food insecurity right now. Giving blood, it's very safe to give blood right now, and their stores are really low. So find something that you can do to help others. I have a friend who's been sending postcards every month to his friends. It is such a joy to get his postcard, right? A little thing. It's a little thing, but again, you're reaching out to other people. Next slide. And then the one thing I think we really have to do right now, and we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, right? But when we think we're going to be through something in a short time and it turns out to be a marathon, that's really hard. In the beginning of the pandemic, calls to helplines, calls to our office, visits to the emergency room for mental health crises went way down, because everyone was like, we're just going to hunker down for these next 6 to 8 weeks. When we started realizing about the beginning of June that this was no 6 to 8 weeks, right? And that we didn't know what was going to end, all those calls went up. Visits to the emergency room went up. And so it's kind of shifting your mindset. That's really hard. If we know it's going to be a year, we can plan that, right? When we don't know what it's going to be, it's hard. So shift your mind frame to know that, okay, this is really going to be a marathon instead. Next slide. So one thing that we really have to give people right now is grace and space. It's been really hard for people, and there are going to be times when people are inappropriate, right? Whether they're going to yell at you, they blow up at something that you don't think is really, that big of a deal. They're honking their horn at somebody who didn't go fast enough through that, when the light turned green, all of those kinds of things. And I think when we respond to anger or someone being upset by actually being nice and compassionate, we feel better, and it actually resolves the issue better. So when we think about like de-escalation, right, in the mental health world, it's not yelling back at someone. I mean, that's like the worst thing you can do. It's like throwing gasoline on the fire. And if you get yourself upset, you're not feeling good about anything either. So when you respond in a different way and you're consciously responding with kindness and compassion, you feel better and you de-escalate the situation. And so really think about that. And, we've been in a crisis for a year. It's hard, and we all have our days. If you were all being honest, right, you would all say, yeah, I had one of those days, right? It's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back kind of thing. It wasn't the actual action. It was just too much for that day. So give people grace and space. Just know we all have been through a difficult time. We are doing the best that we can. And in many ways, we are having a normal reaction to an abnormal world. Next slide. So here's some things that you can do. So first is really promoting that kind of well-being and promoting mental wellness. We know that if in a doctor's office, if they put a flyer in there or a little brochure about depression, that patient is more likely to talk about depression symptoms, because just seeing that flyer has told them it's okay to talk about it. So put up things. If you have like a newsletter that goes out to, or an email that goes out to all of your staff, put something in there about, here's a mental wellness activity, right? Here's some things that you can do. There's lots of free like depression screening tools out there. Mental Health America has them. Promote that. Say, check on yourself, see how you're doing. Really making sure that people know what the resources are as well, because that can be a really big thing. So promote, stress reducing activities, tell your employees you care about their mental health, and it's been a really hard time. And if you can share anything personally, that breaks it down, because we know that the best way to kind of break down that wall of silence around mental illnesses is when someone shares their story. So I have had, at some of the full staff meetings, I've shared, what, this has been a really hard week for me. I'm feeling pretty stressed and pretty anxious about the future. And here's what I did to try to take care of myself. Next slide. One thing I would really encourage you to do is to check your health plan. So a lot of employers, they don't really go into the details for mental health, but I can't tell you how many times you can find out that actually your health plan doesn't cover much when it comes to mental health. Maybe it doesn't cover residential treatment for adults. It doesn't cover a specialized type of residential treatment for children called psychiatric residential treatment. It might have limits, which it shouldn't have under mental health parity. But most employers have not done a deep dive into what their mental health benefits are. And I would really encourage you to do that, because if your employees don't get the mental health care that they need, they're not going to be productive employees. The other thing is to make sure everybody knows and remind people monthly about what's in their EAP, their Employee Assistance Program. You get that information when you're first hired, you never look at it again, right? And often there's like, you can have help with your financial stuff, with your budgeting. You can get 5 free sessions with a therapist, but people don't know about it. So make sure that you're pushing that out, because then you're encouraging people to do that as well. And then especially during this time, we know that more frequent meetings can also be really helpful with people to kind of do more check-ins. Next slide. Encourage people to take their vacations and breaks. You really want to do that. You know, do some rewards for well-being. We've been doing a thing where I do a weekly email to the staff. And so I've told them, send me your picture of self-care. And so, you know, people get kind of bonus points if they do that. And I include them in the weekend update. But what also it does is it says, well, here, you could be knitting, you could be taking a walk, somebody went skiing, right? And it's just promoting people taking care of themselves. And then when they see their fellow employees doing it too, right, it makes it more natural. Next slide. And I know some of this is a little redundant, but I just want you again to think about accommodations during this time and even when the pandemic is over. Most accommodations for mental illness are really inexpensive. There's some good resources. One is called the JAN Network, Job Accommodation Network. Gives you lots of good ideas for what to do when someone is maybe struggling with attendance, struggling with concentrating, things like that. And again, they're very inexpensive. Here at NAMI, I feel like we're the queen of accommodations because we have people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression and anxiety. And we have found very simple ways to kind of help people. And some of it is just even things like, you know, when I went to college, the computer was the entire basement in the science building. So, you know, I was punching key cards. And so someone of my age, right, is not going to know all the bells and whistles on all the different computer programs. So helping people know, here's what you can do in Outlook, you know, here's some tools that you can do to keep track of things, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that people know about those. Next slide. So I also want to just raise when you should worry. And, you know, to be honest, we are expecting a mental health pandemic as soon as COVID ends. And we're also expecting the suicide rate to go up. And so it's helpful to kind of know about these things. So we should worry if somebody's kind of numb to things and isn't really emotionally responding to anything. Or perhaps somebody has really high anxiety or fear about things, you know, overly anxious or fearful. We look for changes. And this is not just for your employees, but your family members and even yourself as well. Changes in appetite, changes in sleeping, changes in energy levels, all of those things. Difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, nightmares. Little kids, you know, little kids don't have ways to express what they're feeling. And so it comes out in other ways, including things like nightmares or holding on to you too closely. All the physical reactions, because our head is connected to the rest of our body. So things like headaches and stomach aches, racing heart. People who have a chronic health condition that's actually getting worse, like diabetes. People being angry or short-tempered, particularly teenagers. And I know people are like, well, how can you tell? Teenagers are always short-tempered and angry. But it really is about kind of the intensity and the length of time. Yes, every teenager is going to be short-tempered, but not for 3 weeks straight, not for 4 weeks straight, right? Yes, every teenager is going to go up to the room and slam the door, not every day and not for 3 to 4 weeks. So you need to pay attention. And then looking at increased use of alcohol or marijuana or whatever, alcohol is a depressant. And so when people are drinking a lot, they're actually becoming more depressed, not better. And that is a sign. Next slide. And so what you can do to prevent suicide is actually to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? It does not plant the idea. And most people are pretty honest. And asking that one question could actually save a life. And so don't be afraid to ask. And if they say, yes, I'm thinking about it, ask them how. If they have a very solid plan, they say, well, I'm going to, you know, do X, Y, or Z, then you want to get them help right away. Sometimes people are just having suicidal thoughts, but don't have a plan. You have a little bit more time to work with them and get the help to them. And so that if you go to the next slide, here's some numbers you want to put in your phone. And yes, sorry, I keep forgetting about the polls. I wrote it down, but I still keep forgetting. So let's try this poll before I give you where you need to call. What are the signs that someone may be suicidal? Okay. So, it can be all of these things, but the things that we see most frequently are giving away personal items, right? Because they're not going to live anymore, so they might as well give these things away. Those changes, sleeping, eating, drinking, are also huge, and talking about death. And we hear people saying, it's just not worth it to be around. I'm not useful to anyone. Those kinds of things. Those are things that you absolutely want to pay attention to. Now, if you have your cell phones out, I'm going to encourage you to put these in your cell phone right now. The Star crisis works in Minnesota sometimes, so let's skip that one. But we have a text line. Anyone under the age of 30 never makes a phone call. So we have text helplines. And so you can text MN for Minnesota to 741-741. And it's a text line. They are answering 24/7. And it can be extremely helpful. And, if someone's thinking about suicide, really struggling with their mental health, that's what they need to do. They can also call the National Suicide Hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. Again, it operates 24/7. Both of these numbers are anywhere in the country. So be sure and put them in your phone, because I can tell you this, you're going to have a situation where you are worried about someone. And you're going to think, what are those numbers? Put them in your phone. They're right there. And if you're worried about someone, you're worried about maybe your teenager or someone else in your house, I want to make sure that you lock up anything that could be used, including over-the-counter medication, and put the text line on that box where you lock it up so that somebody sees it. And if you're using a box to lock it up, it should be a key and not a number lock. Any teen is going to know exactly what number you've used, your street address, your birthday, something like that. So use one with a key. If you have to call 911 because you think it's more immediate, ask for what's called a CIT trained officer, crisis intervention team. And they have special training, and so know how to respond to things like suicide and mental health crises. Next slide. So just briefly what we do. So we do have a program called HELP, Helping Employees Live in a Pandemic. And we offer them, of course, through Zoom. We provide a lot of education classes to family members because they don't know what to do. You weren't taught this in your high school health class. And so we provide that information. And our classes are taught by people with lived experience. So I'm a family member. When I teach to other family members, they feel, I don't know, some comfort, right? Because I'm not judging them. I've been through the same thing. We have a lot of booklets and fact sheets about mental illnesses and the mental health system. We do all the suicide prevention classes. We have peer-led support groups for people with mental illnesses, parents of children, and then family members. We have a helpline. We take over 4,000 calls a year to help people kind of navigate, not a crisis line, but a helpline. We do public awareness presentations, obviously legislative advocacy, and NAMI Walks is actually across the country, and it's the largest kind of awareness raising event. There are no fees. We really want people to come together and talk about mental illness. And then I've left my contact information on the next slide. Oh, well, you can, join NAMI, attend an event. I know we're kind of running out of time, volunteer, things like that. Most of our funding actually comes from individual donors as well. And then there's our contact information. So I really appreciate the time today. I know I kind of zipped through a whole lot, and I'll be answering questions later, but I'll turn it over to you, Ron.
Great. Thank you, Sue. Such an important topic, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for helping employers become aware and educate them and let them know of their options. As Sue talked about, this is their contact information. I know we breezed through the supporting of NAMI, but I do want to reiterate that especially during the pandemic, a lot of nonprofits have had a hard time collecting the same amount of money that they have normally gotten in donations. So please keep NAMI in mind as you think about your contributions here in 2021. To reiterate the housekeeping items, please type any questions in the Q&A if you have them. As I mentioned, we'll create a Q&A document, a PDF, and forward it out to anyone. If anyone would like the replay or a slide deck, let me know and I can email that to you. My email is down there below, And of course, you can always connect with one of our team members as well. So with that, again, Sue, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great day.